Yo, let me show you this. So this is in 1850 in the Commonwealth, Frankfurt, whatever, right? Number 6 says, no free Negro shall be capable of acquiring, now ignore this part, but in fee or holding or owing to any length of time as hire or other ways, whatever, all the kind of stuff in between. So no Negro shall be capable of acquiring any slave other than the husband, wife, parent, or descendants of such a free Negro. Now, how many times have y'all been telling people that your family owns you? A lot of the times. Now, sometimes some people may have a record of some YT person owning a black liquor ship slave. But in many cases, this was the case. And this came out of this article called The Revised Statutes of Slaves, Runaways, Free Negroes, and Emancipation. And I read down there. Now, first of all, it talks about how if you just look like you black, basically, and if you got a little mulatto in you, or if you're a little mulatto, you're still a Negro. Now, none of this stuff talks about being African. But get your screenshot out the way, because for those of you who have been saying that we owned our people in many cases, here is a law saying, hey, you can own your folks, and that's the only people you're supposed to be able to own by law. Again, this is 1850. The Fugitive Slave Act passed in 1850. Now, what's crazy is I was thinking about this. I said between 1840 and 1850, something changed between the census where it wasn't like that before. Because in 1850 census, and we'll come back to this, you have new things called slave schedules. But in 1840, you didn't have slave schedules. You had still black people listed as slaves and free Negroes on the other page. And then you have free white persons. But what's the deal? Why did they have to make a change? I kept telling myself they only went to this format for like 1 to 2 from either 1830 and 1840, and in 1850 they switched it up to slave schedules. And I was wondering what was the difference. But then I noticed what the big difference was. Likely to play games with us, but first of all, this guy is Paul Tillman Willis. Now, he was on my actual tree, and it says slave owner Tillman at first. And until I did some more history and looking this up, I started finding out he was of black heritage coming out of Alabama. Going down, you'll notice that there's an 1840 census and an 1850 census. 1850, this shows quite a few persons. 1840 right here shows only 3. Which is kind of odd because prior to this, it showed more. Yeah, I wish I could show it, but I got to resubscribe to get access to that one. But it showed free YT persons, and I'll show you on another page. But here in 1850, it shows a bunch of so-called other people or slaves, as you see here. Now, I don't think he had 25 people in his family. Some of these people could be slaves or workers for him or other family members from extended families. But here are some of the younger ones as well. So again, in 1850, you have Mr. Paul Tillman Willis here. As I jump in close, and you can see that he has slaves listed under him. Mr. Willis, all of these people, they're all B for black, right? Now, you got ages. When I first saw this, I was like, age 1, 1, 3, 3, 8, 10, 13. Those aren't slaves. Those are kids, okay? Newborns in some cases and toddlers. Like, I was like, this has got to be family members, as well as some of these people might have to be his wife, like 49 and 55. He was 55, or there was, I don't know how old he was, actually. This is one of the slaves, but one of these would be his wife and others, because again, this section in 1840, I don't want to say again, I didn't say this, but this section in 1840 used to say head of household. And the head of household was Paul Tillman Willis down here. Okay, now he's the head of household, but instead of a head of household now, in 1850, they have slave schedules and they call them slave owners. You see the difference? Because under slave owners, under the slave schedules, they separate out all the black people. But on here, you can't really see too well. I get a little bit closer because, like I said, I don't have access. I don't want to resubscribe for the document. But and I should have saved it long ago. But either way, free white. This says free white persons. There's male. There's female. These are age ranges. Okay, Mr. Paul Timon Willis right here. He has a tick mark right there. He had a YT person on his head of household plantation. He had another tick mark here and another tick mark there, and so on and so forth. He had a few YT persons under him. But in 1850, he had 0 YT persons. Why? Because all YT persons were listed instead of free YT persons and where you stayed at under a head of household. We'll just list you all on a separate thing called free white inhabitants. And all the white people, whether you stayed on Mr. Tillman's plantation or not, got put on a separate enumeration or separate list. Or got separate, whatever. But a separate list. So that way they can separate the black. Now they could have kept this format because there was already slaves here. There was there's a free colored section, and then on the next page over, there's a slave category. So they could have kept it. The only difference between 1840 and 1850, the reason that I see in the census changes is the fact that I see that anybody listed as white is no longer listed up under a black person, even if you stayed there. But in 1840, you could be listed up under them. They didn't need your information. They went to the head of household and only went to the head of household back then. And they recorded everybody that was in under the head of household. But it looks like somebody said, hey, we need to change that up, 1850, come out with new laws that a Negro should not be capable of holding any other slave other than another Negro in his family or another Negro. Actually, it just says family. Then that allowed them to make the other little switcheroo to make it look like all black people were slaves and nobody YT was a slave. Because if they continue to have lists up until 1865 to show YT people under black folks, you'll start questioning, why are all them white folks up under black head of household plantations? Now, I thought about that almost a year ago when I found that document, okay? And I was like, why was the change from 1840 to 1850 on the paperwork? Why did you remove the white folks from Tillman's plantation? Why did you change up the paperwork? Especially when 1860, you have the slave schedules also, but 1870, people are free and it don't really matter. In my opinion, that was the whole trick. How do we change the history up to make these black people look like they all were slaves? And we'll sit here, we'll try to enumerate them into the census and call them all slaves based upon lookership. And the whole slave ship story narrative will help to back that up, even though it leaves a lot of holes in the story, because people will say, well, how did free people, Negroes, get free? Well, the Negroes got free because of blah, 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 blah. But, in here it even talks about free Negroes being sold back into slavery. So, yeah, your family may have owned you as a slave. But it is not that they owned you. You were just listed, enumerated into a census calling you a slave. Okay, it's the only way they can own you is to pay for you. And a lot of people will make you think that they paid for your freedom because they needed to. You were a slave. Why wouldn't they? They had to pay the money. But that's not the case. Okay, so it's not always the case. I mean, in many cases, it probably wasn't the case, period. I think, and I have known for a while, they needed to inflate their slavery numbers to make the story seem truthful. No different from when people got the jab for the sickness and they needed to make a lot of false truth, or what do they call a false positive test to make everybody look like they was getting the sickness. So you better go get the jab. You got to watch these folks. They be playing.